Oxford Bookworms Fact Files. Stage 2. Leonardo da Vinci by Alex Raynham. Read by Danica Fairman. Published and copyright Oxford University Press 2013. 1. Leonardo da Vinci. It is a winter afternoon in 1467, and the artist Andrea del Verrocchio is walking along a busy street in Florence. On both sides of the road, people in workshops are making glass, pictures, beautiful clothes, and many other things. From an open door he hears the sounds of people at work, cutting stone and hitting metal. Andrea stops and goes through a door into his workshop. It is noisy inside, and it smells of smoke and chickens. A big fire is burning, and everyone is busy. At one end of the room, he sees Leonardo, a tall, good-looking boy with long hair. He is the son of Andrea's friend, Ser Piero da Vinci. Leonardo is 14 years old. He has only been in the workshop for about a year, but Andrea is very happy with him. He is a clever boy. He works hard and he learns fast. What is he doing when Andrea comes in? Perhaps he is breaking eggs to make paint. Does he turn around and smile? Today, we remember Leonardo as a famous painter and a great thinker. We are still studying his work and learning new things 500 years after his death. Surprisingly, the great Leonardo da Vinci did not come from a rich family, and he did not spend much time at school. So, how did he become one of the cleverest and most famous people in history? Two. Early life. Leonardo was born on the 15th of April 1452, near a small town called Vinci. The family name, da Vinci, just means from Vinci. The town is built on a hill, about 35 kilometers from Florence. But in 1452, that was a long day's ride by horse. Vinci was a quiet town, far away from the great buildings, money, and important people of Florence. Leonardo's mother and father both married different people after he was born. His father, Ser Piero da Vinci, lived and worked in Florence, but his mother, Caterina, stayed in Vinci. Leonardo probably spent most of his early life around Vinci. Leonardo knew a lot about life in the country. He played in the fields around the town, and he loved animals. Leonardo watched the workers, and he learned how people built and made things. He was interested in everything, and he soon began to draw. Leonardo could not go to school with the children of important families because his father and mother were not married. At the time, many books were in Latin, but because Leonardo did not learn this language at school, he could not read them. Years later, he finally taught himself to read Latin. When he was young, Leonardo had to teach himself other things too, like how to write. Leonardo wrote with his left hand, and he used mirror writing, which is very difficult to read. when you put a mirror next to his writing, you can read it. He learnt to draw with his left hand too. When Leonardo was about 13, his father took some of his drawings to a friend in Florence, the artist Andrea del Verrocchio. Verrocchio liked the drawings, and in about 1466, Leonardo became an apprentice, someone who learns new things while he works, in Verrocchio's workshop. Leonardo enjoyed drawing, so he was very happy. Verrocchio's workshop was like a small factory, and lots of people worked there. The workshop made many different things, like beautiful paintings and sculptures, and clothes for important days of the year. Leonardo probably started with small jobs, like making paint or cleaning the workshop. Later, he learned to draw, work with stone, design clothes, and do many other things. The apprentices lived above Verrocchio's workshop. They ate, laughed, and played music together. The boys became great friends, and sometimes they fought. For Leonardo, it was like a new family. In workshops like Verrocchio's, lots of people worked on the paintings. Verrocchio did the most important work, and then his best apprentices finished it. Leonardo was a fast learner, and he soon became a talented painter. Before long, he was helping Verrocchio to finish important paintings. At the time, Italy was made of lots of different small countries. Florence was the biggest city of one of these countries. It was also one of the biggest and richest cities in Europe. People were building churches and great houses all over the city, and they needed paintings and sculptures to put in them. It was a time of new ideas about painting, science, and many other things. Today, we call this time the Renaissance. Because Florence was a very rich and important city, it was home to many of the greatest thinkers and artists of the time. Some of these great men visited Verrocchio's workshop, and the young Leonardo met them. He probably dreamed that he could be like them too. Florence in the 1460s was a great place for talented people, and nobody was more talented than Leonardo. Three. Painting and sculpture. There is a story about Leonardo when he was a young painter. One day, Leonardo was finishing a Verrocchio painting in the workshop when Verrocchio came in. Leonardo's work was beautiful, and Verrocchio knew it. "I'll never paint again," the older man said. Leonardo was not an apprentice anymore. He was one of the best young painters in Florence. Most workshops at the time used a paint that was made with eggs. But Leonardo tried a new paint, oil paint. It was possible to do more things with oil paint, and it helped him to paint deeper, brighter colors. Leonardo went outside and drew things like flowers, water, and stones. He studied these things like a scientist. He also worked with doctors to understand how our bodies work. Because of this, everything in his pictures was very real. Leonardo's father helped him to open a workshop in Florence. But it was not an easy time for Leonardo. He had a lot of problems with some important people. In 1482, Leonardo left Florence and travelled to Milan. Leonardo left angry people behind him back in Florence because he had not finished paintings for them. This happened all through his life. Leonardo is one of the most famous painters in history, but he only finished about 20 paintings. This painting of Cecilia Gallerani is one of them. Leonardo was happy in Milan. He had a busy workshop with lots of young apprentices. The ruler of Milan, Ludovico Sforza, spent a lot of money on art because he wanted to show that he was as good as the rulers of places like Florence. Leonardo was given money to be a part of Sforza's court, the circle of important people who worked for him. He designed buildings and machines for Sforza. He also painted beautiful pictures, like the painting of Cecilia Gallerani, Sforza's young love. In 1495, Sforza asked Leonardo to paint a picture called The Last Supper. The painting was for the wall of an important church building, and it told the story of the last meal Jesus had with his followers. It took Leonardo many months to plan the picture. He drew each person and changed how they sat or stood around the table. Leonardo's design for the painting is amazing. The lines of the walls in the real room are the same as the lines in the picture. It is like looking into another part of the same room. The Last Supper is a very big painting, 4.6 meters tall and 8.8 meters long, and it is on a very high wall. People built places for Leonardo to stand while he worked. Sometimes he worked for hours and did not stop to eat. At other times, he stood and looked at the painting for hours, but he did not touch his paints. Leonardo finally finished The Last Supper in 1498. It was one of the greatest paintings of the Renaissance, but Leonardo was worried. When he painted The Last Supper, he worked in a different way from most painters, and he made the paint in a different way too. Soon, he understood his mistake. The painting started to break into pieces. When Leonardo looked at his great work, he probably thought, "It will fall off this wall in a few years." Luckily for us, people found ways to save it. At the same time as The Last Supper, Leonardo was working on a great sculpture of Ludovico Sforza's father, Francesco. Leonardo wanted to make a sculpture of Francesco on a great horse. For years he drew horses and made designs, but there were problems. Leonardo made sculptures when he worked with Verrocchio, but this sculpture was much bigger. He wanted it to be the biggest sculpture in Europe, and he needed about 60 tons, 60,000 kilograms, of an expensive metal called bronze to make it. His drawings show a walking horse with only 2 legs on the ground. But how could he put a heavy sculpture like this on 2 legs? In 1492, Leonardo made a great horse sculpture in clay. It was 7.3 meters tall, and it was amazing. People talked about the clay horse for years, but Leonardo never made the final metal sculpture. Why? Because the bronze for the horse was used to make guns. There was a war between France and Milan, and in 1499, Ludovico Sforza had to leave the city. When the French army arrived, French soldiers shot at Leonardo's clay horse and broke it into pieces. After 17 years in Milan, Leonardo left the city. When Leonardo was 52, the rulers of Florence asked him to paint a picture of a famous battle for a great building in their city. On the opposite wall, they asked Michelangelo to paint another battle. The 2 men were enemies. Michelangelo was only 29, but he was already famous for his amazing sculptures. One day, he laughed at Leonardo in front of people in a town square. He said that Leonardo was not a good artist because he could not build his great horse. Both men worked on their paintings, and it soon became a battle between the 2 most famous artists of their time. Who was the best? Everyone in Florence talked about them and waited to see their great works. But in the end, neither of them won the battle. Michelangelo made some drawings, but then he went back to Rome. Leonardo started his painting, but because of the way he painted on the wall, it soon began to break into pieces. At about the same time as he was working on the battle painting in Florence, Leonardo began a painting of a young woman called Lisa del Giocondo. Today, we call it the Mona Lisa, or La Gioconda. Leonardo used new ideas to paint the Mona Lisa, and other painters soon began to work in this new way. But is that why it became the most famous picture in the history of art? Look at Mona Lisa's face. Is she starting to smile? Now look again. She is not smiling anymore. We look from one side of her mouth to the other, and her smile changes in front of our eyes, like the smile of a real person. What is she thinking? Because of that smile, you stop and look at the painting again. You ask yourself questions. Writers like Emile Zola and Oscar Wilde wrote about Mona Lisa's smile. They said she was a dark and dangerous woman. Her smile hid many secrets. On the 21st of August, 1911, a man called Vincenzo Perugia walked into the Louvre Museum in Paris. He took the Mona Lisa off the wall, put it under his coat, and walked out of the building. The next day, the Mona Lisa was in newspapers around the world. When the museum opened again, thousands of visitors went to see the empty place on the wall. For 2 years, Perugia kept the painting in his house in Florence. He hid it in a box under some old clothes. Perugia was caught in 1913 when he tried to sell the painting, and the Mona Lisa then came back to Paris. But nobody forgot the story of the lost woman with the strange smile. Today, you can find the Mona Lisa in paintings by modern artists, on clothes, in films and songs, and 1,000 other places. Leonardo usually painted important people, but Lisa del Giocondo was not famous. She was just a young wife from Florence, but she became one of the most famous women in the world. 4. Into the dark. One day, when Leonardo was a child, he was walking near Vinci and he found a deep, dark hole in the side of a hill. He wanted to look inside, but he was afraid of the dark. It was better to walk away, but Leonardo was curious. He had to go in. Leonardo was one of the most curious men in history. He was full of questions, and he wanted to know the answers. He wanted to learn how our bodies work, how the weather changes, what the moon is made of, and many other things. He thought deeply, studied the world around him, and discovered things for himself. When Leonardo was working for Sforza in Milan, he studied the rivers, mountains, and rocks of northern Italy. He discovered how a lot of rocks are made by water over a very long time. High in the mountains, Leonardo also found fossils of animals that came from the sea. He asked, how did they get there? In Leonardo's day, people thought that the things around them, like mountains and seas, always stayed the same. But the fossils told a different story. Leonardo discovered that the world around us changes over time. He wrote about how places under the sea can become mountains. It was an amazing idea for his time, and we did not know that he was right for hundreds of years. People in Leonardo's day thought that the moon was bright because it made light. Leonardo discovered that the moon is bright because of light from the sun. Leonardo imagined that he was standing on the moon and looking back at the world. From the moon, our world looks bright too, he thought. And 450 years later, we finally photographed our world from the moon. A bright, blue circle in the dark, just like Leonardo imagined. In Milan, Leonardo started to write about things like maths, painting, and engineering. His pages are full of beautiful drawings with notes all around them. He often wrote about different things on the same piece of paper. Perhaps Leonardo did this because paper was so expensive at the time. Or perhaps he did it because he had so many ideas in his head. He could not stop thinking about different things. In 1487, Leonardo made a drawing called The Vitruvian Man. It was made to study the body, and it has become the most famous drawing in the history of art. Today you can see it on €1 coins, and in many other places. At the same time, Leonardo was making beautiful drawings of our anatomy, the inside of our bodies. Many people in Leonardo's day thought that it was wrong to study our anatomy. But for Leonardo, the body was like a machine. He wanted to see how it worked. He studied how people were different from animals, and he worked with doctors. Leonardo cut bodies open, drew them, and made some amazing discoveries. One day, Leonardo spoke to a very old man in a hospital in Florence. A few hours later, the man died. Leonardo wanted to know why people die. So later, he cut the man's body open and tried to find the answer. Leonardo saw that the walls of the man's arteries were much narrower than the arteries of a young person. Perhaps these narrow arteries stop the blood which is moving through our bodies, Leonardo thought. Was he right? Did this problem kill the old man? We do not know, but about 25% of all deaths today happen because of problems with the arteries and heart. Amazingly, Leonardo's anatomy drawings are still helping people today. In 2005, a doctor at Papworth Hospital in Cambridge, England, studied Leonardo's drawings of the heart. They gave him an idea about how to work in a different way on one part of the heart. This helped to save people's lives. It was not easy to study anatomy in Leonardo's time. He used knives and his hands to open bodies, and he often worked at night. The bodies began to smell bad very quickly, and at times Leonardo had to leave them in his workshop. It was hard to go into a dark room and look at death in the middle of the night. Leonardo was afraid, but he was curious too. He had to go and see. The Great Inventor. In November 2011, visitors played with big wood and metal models in a shopping centre in Adana, Turkey. They turned and moved things, took photos, and read about the life of Leonardo da Vinci. The 34 models were made from Leonardo's drawings, and they showed machines for building things, studying the weather, flying, and even walking on water. In Leonardo's time, people used machines to do things like move water or heavy stones. He learned to use and mend machines when he was an apprentice in Verrocchio's workshop. Leonardo studied these machines carefully and thought about different ways to use their parts. Leonardo invented new machine parts and drew plans for many new inventions. He designed terrible guns and machines that could cut wood or make paint or books. He also invented musical instruments. Leonardo made one instrument from silver. It sounded beautiful, and it looked like a horse's head. Some of Leonardo's most famous inventions are his robots. They worked like the parts in a clock. They could move around a room for a short time without any help. Leonardo built different robots to entertain people at parties. One robot was like a car with 3 wheels. Once, he built a robot soldier. It looked like a real person, and it could walk, move its arms, legs, and head, and open and close its mouth. Hundreds of years later, robot engineers in America have learned from Leonardo's robot designs. The drawings have helped them to build robots that look and move like people. In 1485, Leonardo designed a parachute, but it was 515 years before anyone tried his design. In 2000, a British man called Adrian Nicholas made a jump with a parachute that used Leonardo's design and materials from his time. And in 2008, Olivier Vietti-Tipa from Switzerland made a jump of about 600 meters with a parachute that used Leonardo's design but modern materials. Both parachutes worked. When Leonardo was in his 50s, he thought about his early life and wrote about it. What did he remember first? It was not his mother or father. It was a bird. When he was a baby, the bird flew down to him, and he never forgot it. Leonardo loved birds. He often bought birds from people in markets, but he did not keep them. He paid the money and took the birds. Then he opened his hands, and the birds flew away free. For years, Leonardo studied how birds fly. He dreamed of flying for most of his life, and he drew lots of different flying machines. One drawing shows a machine with turning wings. Leonardo's machine could not work, but nearly 400 years later, a young Russian boy called Igor Sikorsky saw the drawing. He was a dreamer too. After years of trying, in 1939, Sikorsky built and flew a helicopter, the VS-300. 4 years later, his factory was the first in the world to make helicopters. Another drawing shows an ornithopter, a flying machine with wings that moved up and down like a bird. A pilot used his arms and legs to move the wings. In Leonardo's time, it was not possible to build this machine because the materials were too heavy. Finally, in 2010, students in Canada built and flew an ornithopter. It was made of very light materials, and the pilot moved the wings up and down with his legs. In about 1505, Leonardo studied the wind on a hill near Florence, and he also wrote about flying from there. So the big question is, did he ever try to fly? At the time, Leonardo and Michelangelo were planning their pictures for The Great Battle. Both men wanted to show that they were the best. Was Leonardo planning to fly and show the world that he was cleverer than Michelangelo? 30 years after Leonardo died, a man called Girolamo Cardano wrote about how Leonardo tried to fly but could not. Cardano's father was Leonardo's friend. So, was it true? There is nothing about it in Leonardo's writing, so we do not know the answer. But we can imagine it. We can see him on a hill near Florence on a hot summer day in 1505. He is standing and looking at the fields below, with his long hair moving in the wind. He puts on his wings. What is he feeling? He has dreamed of flying all his life, and now it is time to try. He could die, but he has to know the answer. He runs into the wind as fast as he can. Six. Leonardo's City. In the terrible winter of 1485, thousands of people became ill in the city of Milan, and many died. Then, on the 16th of March, the sky became dark in the middle of the day. People in the streets did not know what was happening. They probably thought that it was the end of the world. Scientists like Leonardo knew that the moon was moving in front of the sun. Leonardo made holes in a piece of paper to watch it. The sun did not hurt his eyes because he held the paper in front of his face. In just 3 years, about a third of the people in Milan died. Leonardo looked at the city around him, with its dirty canals and narrow streets, and he began to draw plans for a better, cleaner city. Leonardo's city had big streets and large, open squares. He drew machines for moving water to workshops and houses, and he studied ways to keep the water clean. Some of Leonardo's drawings show a city on 2 levels. The bottom level was for canals and roads, so horses, boats, and workers could bring things in and out of the city. On the top level, people could walk about. Many buildings had doors on both levels. In some plans, the canals and streets went under the buildings. Leonardo's city was never built, but parts of many modern cities are built on different levels. In Leonardo's time, the center of Milan was inside a circle of canals. Water was used in the fields and to move machines in workshops, and boats moved things around the city. Leonardo looked at the canals and studied how water moved through them. He designed moving bridges and new ways to use water wheels, and he designed canals that would work better and stay clean. Leonardo also wanted to build new canals from Milan to other places like Pavia. In 1819, 300 years after he died, a canal was finished between Pavia and Milan became one of the most important river cities in Europe. Leonardo drew plans for a lot of buildings, like churches and castles. In 1506, he designed a house for Charles d'Amboise, the new ruler of Milan. There were 2 rivers near the house, so Leonardo designed 2 small canals to take water to a beautiful water garden in the house. Many of Leonardo's designs were very modern for their time, and most of them were not built. In 1503, Leonardo designed a bridge between the old city of Constantinople and Pera in Istanbul. The bridge in his plan, 240 meters long, was bigger than any bridge in the world at the time. Leonardo's design for the bridge was very new, and people did not try to build bridges in that way for another 300 years. The Istanbul Bridge was never built, but 500 years later, Norwegian artist Vebjørn Sand saw a drawing of the bridge and decided to build it. Finally, in 2001, a smaller Leonardo bridge was built across a road in Norway. Now, people are planning to build Leonardo bridges in Turkey, the USA, and other countries. Amazingly, in Des Moines, Iowa, in the USA, people decided not to build a Leonardo bridge because the design looked too modern. Seven. A time of war. Everyone who wrote about Leonardo said that he was a kind man. He was good to his apprentices, and he loved animals. So, why did he work for dangerous men and design terrible war machines? How did he feel when he finally saw war for himself? Many of Leonardo's inventions are war machines, and two of the most famous are called the machine gun and the tank. The machine gun drawings show lines of guns between two wheels. The guns shoot together, so they can kill a lot of soldiers at the same time. Leonardo's tank was a metal machine with 8 soldiers in it. The soldiers turned wheels inside the machine to move it, and they could shoot guns at the enemy outside. A few years ago, people built Leonardo's machine gun and tank for TV, and both machines worked. In 1499, the French king Louis XII went to war, and his army took the city of Milan. Leonardo left Milan and travelled with a friend to Venice. When he arrived in 1500, Venice was fighting a war with the Ottoman Turks. Turkish ships and an army of soldiers waited in the Adriatic Sea, near Venice. People in the city were worried. How could they stop the Ottomans from taking Venice? Leonardo went to the rulers of the city with his ideas. Leonardo planned some moving walls to stop the Turkish army at a river near Venice, and he also drew a boat which could go under the water. For another of his plans, Leonardo designed diving suits. 450 years before modern diving. Soldiers in diving suits could walk on the bottom of the sea, Leonardo explained, and make holes under the Turkish ships. In the end, the Ottoman army never tried to take Venice. Their ships sailed away to fight another battle. Nobody tried Leonardo's diving suit until a few years ago, when British diver Jackie Cozzens tried it on TV. After a small change to Leonardo's design, she walked on the bottom of the sea near Venice in a copy of the diving suit. Between 1502 and 1503, Leonardo worked for Cesare Borgia, the most dangerous man in Italy. In 2 years of bloody battles, Borgia's army took cities all over the centre of Italy. Borgia was trying to build a new country for himself and his father. Leonardo travelled with him and helped Borgia to build better castles. There were terrible battles. For the first time, Leonardo learned what it really means to be a war engineer. Cesare Borgia was a dangerous killer. He murdered a lot of his enemies and some old friends. Leonardo left him very suddenly in 1503, and perhaps he left just in time. Soon he was back in Florence. Florence was fighting a war with Pisa, and in June 1503 there was a terrible battle on a hill near Pisa. Soldiers from Florence took the castle on the hill, and a few days later Leonardo arrived there. Could the castle be stronger? Leonardo's job was to look at the castle carefully and find ways to do this before Pisa tried to take it back. Later, Leonardo and his friend, the writer Niccolò Machiavelli, had a good idea. Pisa got its water from the Arno River, and boats brought food into the city. So why not move the river? That way, Florence could win the war and also become richer. The rulers of Florence loved their plans. Canals could take the river away from Pisa, and ships could sail along the canals to Florence, so the city would have a way to the sea. In August 1504, thousands of workers began to cut the sides of the new canal. Leonardo designed machines to help, but he could not build them in time. In October 1504, there was a terrible storm. The sides of the canal fell away. 80 workers died, and the engineers went home. Once again, Leonardo tried to do too much. The entertainer. The crowd laughs, cries, and shouts. Inside the theatre, mountains move, strange animals dance, and bright stars turn in the dark sky. When Leonardo planned parties and theatre performances for the court, they were nights of music, dancing, lights, and amazing surprises. Leonardo did not just plan things. He was a great entertainer too. He told funny stories, and he was a very talented musician. When he first went to Milan, he was called Leonardo the musician, not Leonardo the painter. He played musical instruments, and he sang as well. Leonardo also wrote stories. They were often about animals, and they always had an important idea in them, like why we must be kind to other people. His stories were told in courts all over Europe, and when people told them, the stories slowly changed. When Leonardo came into a room, everybody looked at him. He wore colourful clothes, he was very good-looking, and his hair was long, when most men cut their hair short. Leonardo was funny, clever, and talented. By 1500, He was famous too. When Leonardo left Florence to visit Milan in 1506, the city's rulers did not want him to go. But the new French rulers of Milan wanted him to work there. For years, the two cities fought for Leonardo's time. The most important men of Europe wanted Leonardo. But what about his family? When Ser Piero da Vinci died in 1504, he left houses and money to 11 of his 12 children. Leonardo got nothing. Many people in Leonardo's family did not have much time for him or love. As a young child, Leonardo had to leave his mother Caterina to live with his father in Florence. He became very close to Ser Piero's first wife, Albiera, but she died when he was young. After that, he was not close to many women, and he never married. In many ways, Leonardo's real family were his friends and apprentices. People like Salai, Zoroastro, and Melzi. Giacomo Caprotti was 10 years old when he became an apprentice in Leonardo's workshop in 1490. He was soon in trouble. The other apprentices called him Salai, which means bad boy. Salai said things that were not true and stole from people, but he became a talented painter. Over the years, he became one of Leonardo's closest friends. Tommaso di Giovanni Massini, or Zoroastro, was good at working with metals. He started working with Leonardo in the 1490s. He kept strange animals and wore very unusual clothes. Neither Zoroastro nor Leonardo ate meat because they did not want to kill animals for food. Zoroastro did not wear clothes that were made from animals either. Some people think that Zoroastro tried to make gold from other metals. Today, we know that this is not possible, but many people tried to do it in Leonardo's day. They worked in secret because it was a crime and you could die for it. We can imagine Zoroastro in a workshop in the middle of the night. He is standing near the fire, doing dangerous work, and there is a smile on his face. In 1507, Leonardo met a young man called Giovanni Francesco Melzi. Melzi came from a rich family, but like Salai, he became a painter in Leonardo's workshop. Leonardo was planning many books, and Melzi helped him to write his ideas. He followed Leonardo for the rest of the great man's life. "9. Man of Mystery." It was easy to invent stories about Leonardo. He had strange friends. He built moving robots and he worked on dead people at night. His workshop was full of smoke and terrible smells. "Is he trying to make gold?" people asked. "Or to make living people from the dead?" In 1513, Leonardo went to Rome to work for Giuliano de' Medici. Rome is the home of the Pope, the most important person in the Roman Catholic Church. The Pope at this time was Leo X, the brother of Giuliano de' Medici. Leo X was a very powerful man. He gave Leonardo a workshop and some people to help him. Leonardo did not know it, but he was probably in great danger. One of Leonardo's new helpers was telling the Pope about his work. In 1514, the Pope's men took Leonardo's anatomy drawings and studied them. Many of Leonardo's ideas were different from the ideas of the Church, and at the time, people were killed because they did not agree with the Church. When the Pope told Leonardo not to study anatomy anymore, he stopped. Leonardo's mirror writing was difficult to read. People like the Pope's men probably thought, "What is he trying to hide? Is it a code?" The answer is probably that Leonardo wrote this way because it was easier for him. If you write with your left hand, it can be easier to write from right to left. But even today, people ask the same questions about Leonardo. What secrets did he know? Millions of people all over the world have enjoyed Dan Brown's book, The Da Vinci Code. It tells the story of a secret code in one of Leonardo's most famous paintings, The Last Supper. Most people who study Leonardo's work say that the Da Vinci Code is just a great story. But are there any real codes in Leonardo's paintings? In The Last Supper, Jesus and his followers are sitting at a table. You can see a lot of bread on the table, and a lot of hands too. In 2007, a computer engineer imagined lines of music on the painting. He changed each hand or piece of bread into a musical note. When you read the notes from right to left, like Leonardo's mirror writing, it makes a short piece of music. Leonardo loved to play music, and he probably wrote it as well. Did he put a musical code into the painting? Or is it just an accident? In November 2011, another possible code was discovered in the Mona Lisa. There are very small lines in the Mona Lisa's eyes and in other places in the painting. Some of these look like letters and numbers. For example, some people say that there is an L and a V in the Mona Lisa's right eye. perhaps for Leonardo and Vinci. But are these really letters, or lines that happen by accident when a painting gets older? We know that Leonardo loved mysteries. In his paintings, he used things like trees or animals as codes for the name of a person. He also wrote mystery questions and drew picture codes to entertain people. If we look at his paintings again, will we find more secrets? Ten. Leaving. One summer evening in 1515, hundreds of rich and important people were at a party in Lyon for François I, the King of France. Suddenly, a door opened, and a robot lion came into the room. The lion moved its head and walked over to the king. Then a door in its body opened, and flowers came out. They were the fleurs-de-lis, the flowers of the kings of France. The robot was a present from the Medici family to the new French king, and it was made by Leonardo da Vinci. The king liked this amazing present very much, and he wanted Leonardo to come to France. After Giuliano de' Medici died in March 1516, Leonardo stayed in Rome for a few months and then left. It was a good time to go. Younger painters like Raphael and Michelangelo were getting the best jobs in Rome, and the Pope's men were watching Leonardo. In the summer of 1516, Leonardo rode across the mountains to France with his friend Francesco Melzi. He probably knew that he would never see his country again. Horses and other animals carried all of his things: his paints, paper and drawings, engineering models, books and clothes. On the back of one animal, the Mona Lisa was carried across the mountains, through the rain and cold. The journey probably took them 3 months, and it was very difficult for Leonardo. He was old and ill, and he could not move his right hand anymore. When Leonardo arrived in France, François I gave him a big house in Amboise, about 1 kilometre from one of the king's castles. There was a secret way under the ground from the castle to Leonardo's house. People say that the king visited Leonardo at night. The great old man from Florence and the young French king became great friends, and they talked for hours. Leonardo probably did not paint in these years. He drew, wrote about engineering and science, designed buildings, and gave parties for the king. Famous people came to visit the great Leonardo and look around his workshop. At the same time, he was working with Melzi and thinking about how to make his notes into books. He knew that he did not have much time. Leonardo da Vinci died on the 2nd of May, 1519. He was 67 years old. In later stories and paintings, he dies in the arms of Francois I, but we do not know if the king was really there at the time. Francesco Melzi was probably next to his bed, crying for his dear friend. Later, Melzi wrote a letter to Leonardo's family and told them of his death. Then he saved Leonardo's writings and kept them all his life. In later years, Melzi's family sold and gave away many pages of Leonardo's work. Some of them were lost. Leonardo made over 6,000 pages of notes and drawings about engineering, maths, anatomy, art, water, light, and many other things. But his notes were not made into books for a long time, so people could not learn from them. It took hundreds of years for other people to discover some of the things that Leonardo wrote about. We are still finding lost work by Leonardo da Vinci today. Art detectives travel around the world looking for lost Leonardos. They use the latest science to study hundreds of possible works, and sometimes they find a real one. In 1966, 2 books of Leonardo's notes and drawings were discovered in a library in Madrid. And in 2010, a note by Leonardo was found in France. Then, in November 2011, visitors to a museum in London stood in front of a Leonardo da Vinci painting called the Salvator Mundi. The Salvator Mundi was painted by Leonardo in about 1513 for King Louis XII of France. Later, it went to Britain and then to America. For a long time, people thought that it was by an apprentice called Giovanni Boltraffo. And in 1958, it was sold for only $70. In 2011, after years of study, the art world decided the painting really was by Leonardo da Vinci. If you want to buy it today, you need about $190 million. 11. A man who questioned everything. In 1977, an American pilot and sculptor called Charles Dent read about Leonardo's great horse sculpture. Dent decided to make the sculpture and then give it to the Italian people. It took years for him to get the money, but finally, sculptor Nina Akamu made 2 8-meter horses. In July 1999, an Alitalia plane flew one of them to Milan. Once, Michelangelo laughed at Leonardo because he could not finish his horse. But Leonardo was right. The designs were good. At last, 500 years after French soldiers broke Leonardo's clay horse, the final sculpture stood in Milan. Leonardo was right about another thing, too. We have at last learned to fly. When we think of Leonardo today, we think of his art, his amazing inventions, and his many discoveries. But it is easy to forget that he was also a person, like us. Read his writing, and you will find the ideas of one of the cleverest people who ever lived, and notes about money, friends, and shopping. Some things about Leonardo are not easy to understand. He was a great artist, but many of his paintings were never finished, and others broke into pieces. He was a scientist and inventor, but he hid many of his ideas. He was a kind man, but he worked for dangerous people, like Cesare Borgia. People tell a lot of stories about Leonardo, but some of them are not true. He could not see into the future. He did not really invent the car or the helicopter. His drawings are very different from those machines. Leonardo was not the only great man in Italy. There were other amazing artists, engineers, inventors, and thinkers in the Renaissance. But we remember Leonardo today because he was all of these things. For all of his life, Leonardo asked questions and tried to understand the world around him. How can we make paintings more real? Where do fossils come from? What are things made of? How do birds fly? Why do we become old and die? Leonardo was a man who questioned everything. Leonardo's last work was not a painting or an invention. It was a theatre performance for King Francois I at Leonardo's house in Amboise. We can imagine that hot summer evening in June 1518. Lights are burning in the garden. The performance has finished, and people are walking home. They have seen some amazing things, and they talk excitedly about the great man from Florence. Somewhere in the garden, an old man smiles, thanks people, and says good night. Then he walks away into the dark.